Welcome to today's top news stories as of March 26, 2025. Let's dive into the latest updates from around the world. From the battlefields of Ukraine to the halls of the U.S. Supreme Court, we're covering the stories that matter most. We'll break down the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine as both sides trade accusations over a shattered ceasefire. Plus, we'll take you to Gaza, where the conflict has taken a devastating turn, and to the UK, where the Chancellor's spring statement has sparked both hope and controversy. Let's get started. Hopes for a lasting peace in Ukraine have been dashed as both Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of violating a US-brokered ceasefire agreement. The deal, aimed at protecting critical energy infrastructure, appears to be crumbling just days after it was reached. The Kremlin claims Ukrainian drones targeted power facilities in the Bryansk and Kursk regions, causing widespread blackouts and disrupting the lives of innocent civilians. These attacks, if true, represent a dangerous escalation of the conflict and a blatant disregard for the ceasefire terms. However, Ukrainian officials vehemently deny any involvement in the attacks, dismissing Russia's accusations as fabricated propaganda designed to justify their continued aggression. They argue that Russia is deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure to sow chaos and demoralize the Ukrainian population. With both sides entrenched in their positions, the situation on the ground remains incredibly volatile. The international community is urging restraint and calling for an immediate investigation into the ceasefire violations. The question now is, can this fragile truce be salvaged, or are we witnessing the prelude to an even bloodier chapter in this devastating conflict? The conflict between Israel and Palestine has taken a horrifying turn as Israeli airstrikes claim the lives of at least 38 Palestinians, including women and children. The attacks, which Israel says are targeting militant infrastructure, have drawn international condemnation for their devastating human cost. Among the victims were a mother and her 5 children, the youngest just 6 months old. The family was reportedly asleep in their home when an Israeli missile struck, killing them instantly. The images of their lifeless bodies pulled from the rubble have sparked outrage and grief around the world. Israel maintains that its actions are necessary to defend itself against rocket fire from Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza. They argue that they take every precaution to avoid civilian casualties and blame Hamas for operating in densely populated areas. However, critics accuse Israel of using disproportionate force and failing to adequately distinguish between legitimate military targets and civilians. The international community is calling for an immediate ceasefire and an independent investigation into the civilian deaths. As the death toll continues to rise, the prospects for peace in this long-running conflict seem as distant as ever. Chapter 3. Here in the United States, the Supreme Court is grappling with a series of landmark cases that could reshape American life as we know it. From gun control to transgender rights, the court's rulings on these divisive issues will have far-reaching consequences. One of the most closely watched cases involves the Second Amendment and its interpretation in the 21st century. Gun rights advocates are pushing for expanded access to firearms, while gun control proponents argue for stricter regulations to curb gun violence. The court's decision could have a profound impact on gun laws across the country. Another contentious issue before the court is the rights of transgender youth. At the heart of the debate is the question of whether parents should be able to consent to gender-affirming medical care for their transgender children. The court's ruling will have significant implications for transgender rights and the rights of parents to make medical decisions for their children. These are just a few of the critical issues facing the Supreme Court. Their decisions will shape the legal landscape for years to come and touch on some of the most fundamental questions about American society. Chapter 4. Across the pond, the United Kingdom is grappling with its own set of challenges. In her 2025 spring statement, Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced a series of tough spending cuts aimed at tackling the country's growing budget deficit. Reeves, facing a £15 billion fiscal black hole, outlined a plan that includes reductions in welfare programs and a freeze on public sector pay. The move has drawn criticism from opposition parties and some economists who argue that austerity measures will only stifle economic growth and harm the most vulnerable members of society. However, the Chancellor defended her approach, arguing that tough choices are necessary to restore fiscal responsibility and secure the UK's long-term economic health. She insists that her plan strikes a balance between reducing the deficit and investing in essential public services. One of the key pillars of the Chancellor's plan is a package of reforms aimed at boosting house building. The government's goal is to construct 1.3 million new homes by 2030 to address the country's chronic housing shortage. While ambitious, this target falls short of Labour's 1.5 million goal, prompting concerns that the plan may not go far enough to solve the crisis. That's all for today's top news stories. Stay tuned for more updates, and thank you for watching. From the shattered ceasefire in Ukraine to the heart-wrenching scenes in Gaza and the pivotal decisions facing the Supreme Court, the world is grappling with complex and interconnected challenges. It's more important than ever to stay informed, to engage in meaningful dialogue, and to demand accountability from our leaders. Thank you for joining us tonight, and please stay safe.